Okay, hello, Jim. It's pleasure to have you on this conversation today. Thanks for taking the time to join me and to talk a little bit more about your story. Now, the first thing that I want to mention are the main reasons why you got me hooked and I got curious about your character and about your story. The first thing that stood out to me was that you jumped from a plane on a very early age. I was 17 years old. And this was like for me, what I understand was the jump into an adventurous journey, an entrepreneurial journey ahead of you. Currently, you have this book called The Unnoticed Entrepreneur, which by the title itself, we can guess what kind of gems you give away and what entrepreneurs and leaders can take. But also one of the most staggering things, one of the most exciting things that stood out to me was the fact that you have managed to scale businesses not only in one place but in different places like China, India, UK, working with plenty of people and different types of cultures. This is something that we can learn a lot from. So thank you for joining this conversation, and again, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Nikolai, thank you so much for reaching out. Really grateful to have the opportunity to share what I know, and and appreciate what you're doing with your podcast as well. I know it's not easy to do, so congratulations on building a great show.
Thank you for the kind words. Yeah, you already mentioned that currently you're on the other side of the microphone. You're also used to being as a host, but now a little bit of change in the scenery as being as a guest. So as we introduce you as a hero and we walk on this hero's journey, on this hero's path, usually on in the younger ages, most of the time is the teenage years, once most of the hormones hit us and we start thinking about the world, we start thinking about ourselves and where do we exactly fit in. And as I mentioned, on an early age, you decide to jump into adventures, into high altitudes, into this adrenaline rush. Let's start from there. What triggered you, and what was the spark in your soul or in your organism that made you do it?
I think that I was frustrated, Nikolai. That I wanted to go to Australia for an organization called Operation Rally. It was a 3-month adventure, and I was 17 at the time. And I was frustrated because we couldn't afford to go. My family didn't have, that much money, and it was a once in a lifetime opportunity. And I was working by the hour selling actually toys in a department store. And when I did the maths, I realized I would not be able to go if I didn't do something differently. And so I came across this idea really of, how do I raise money? Why don't I do something sponsored, but rather than do, a sponsored run or a sponsored walk or something that people, would not necessarily see as being that adventurous, I decided to challenge myself because I was terrified of heights, and also do something that other people might think was a little bit different. So I lighted on this idea of jumping out of an aeroplane. And it was a great combination because it was something that other people went, wow, I've always wanted to do that. So it got people engaged in what I was trying to do, or go to Australia, and it was on the right kind of level. So as a result of deciding to do that, I raised enough money and then got to this idea of telling people that I was raising money. So I went to the local media, a magazine called Kentish Gazette, and said, I'm raising this money, jumping out of an aeroplane. Would you like to cover the story? And they said, that would be interesting. So I went to a local sports store and said, look, if I am given a discount on your camping and outdoor gear, that all the things I need for Operation Rally, I can get you into the newspaper. And they went, oh, okay, that's good. They get a bit of free publicity. So I went back to the newspaper and said, hey, look, I've got the jump. I've got a local store giving me, backpacks and boots on. Let's do a photo shoot. And at the age of 17, sort of somehow managed to package up this sort of sponsorship and promotion, and raised enough money, because then a big company gave me the rest of the money I needed because they saw what I was doing, and I got to Australia. So That was my first kind of foray into entrepreneurship, and really realizing that we do accomplish in proportion to what we attempt, Nikolai, really. And that often following the normal route of, for example, working by the hour for someone else, I was never going to get to the destination that I wanted to get to. So I had to take a different road to get to that destination, or I felt that my journey would never end. So that's the backstory, really, to doing that jump and helping to get to Australia and build that first part of my story.
Oh, this sounds amazing. Thanks for introducing us, Jim. And actually, something that you said that stood out to me, like the success is a proportion of the attempts that we do, the attempts that we make on a daily basis in our lives. So I'm writing it down as a note. But something else that made a quite an impression on me. It's usually in those teenage years when the things start triggering us, and we see that we're not feeling very comfortable in this environment. Like there should be some level of uncomfort, some level of our parents are doing their best, but not currently good enough for the current situation, and especially when you start growing up, this urge to start taking care of yourself rather than rely on those around you. This is something else as a motivation. Am I right?
I think taking responsibility for yourself as early as you can is a really great way of demonstrating that you're ready to be an adult, And I had 3 siblings and divorced parents, and my parents did as much as they could, right? But we can't rely on other people to bail us out or to take us on our journey, right? Part of the lesson for me has been that I have to be responsible for my own results. And I will only get my own results if I take my own action. I can't expect anyone else to give me what I need to get my results. It's kind of out of balance, right? So the idea as an entrepreneur and as an individual, taking responsibility for your results and therefore your actions, I think has been something that I've personally carried with me for my whole life. And I've always tried, when I have had employees at my company, for example, in Singapore that I started in 1985, to get people to take responsibility for themselves. And that is kind of the only way I think that you can end up with an environment that is sustainable, is everyone is actually taking action according to the overall goals that everyone has got together. So, yeah.
And you mentioned about the organization, how you come up to jump and do this stunt. You mentioned a lot of key factors that are necessary for every business, reaching out to the people that are involved, reaching out to the different stakeholders that are relevant to your current, activity, being this way, the jump. Was it this that made you realize that you want to walk down the entrepreneurial path and gave you some part of the tools necessary to do it?
I know, Nicola, you're looking at stories on this show. When I was young, my parents were academics and social workers, which is terrific. And when we went on holiday, I would always be the one in the car complaining that we were always being overtaken by everybody else in nicer cars. For some reason, I was, from a very early age, fundamentally dissatisfied with not having the best of everything.
Okay.
When we were young, we also lived in America. So I lived in America and Nigeria, actually, when I was younger. And, I got this sense, especially in America, that you could create more, that you could have more, and that was possible. So somehow I had, on the one hand, this dissatisfaction with always being in the slow lane, but also by living in America at the ages of, well, I was there 3 times, once when I was 2, once when I was 11, and went to university there, the sense that you can change your situation if you want to. So these 2 tensions, dissatisfaction with always being in the slow lane and getting a glimpse that you could accelerate out of the slow lane and that you could actually, move much faster if you took a path. But I'd also learned by working in a toy store that working for other people would never be fast enough. So like always, Nikolai, there's, always a bit of a push and always a little bit of a pull. And you kind of have to hope that they work in concert to take you in the direction that you want to go in.
This is I understand why you're using this metaphor and why this memory has been stuck in your head for quite the time. Like, it is pretty good analogy with how we want to develop, whether it's in our careers or just in personal life. If you're following, riding on the right lane and sticking to all of the speed limits, you will be stuck in this lane for quite the time. You need to take the risk, put the blinker, and start overtaking some of the people who are afraid to, cross some of the limits and go over their own limitations even as well, right?
Exactly. And I think that, Nicola, as you've really summed that up nicely, I think that for many people, being in the slow lane is the safe lane.
Yeah.
And I think that's fabulous, right? It's really about which one works for you and which lane you want to be in. Entrepreneurs, we tend to find the slower lane a little bit frustrating, but changing lanes comes with some risk, comes with some need to learn how to do things differently. And it comes with also meeting other people that are traveling in the faster lanes. And personally, I've spent, 30 years of my life since going to Singapore in 95 and then to China in 2006 and then come back to the UK. I've always preferred the slightly faster pace of life. That's not for everybody, of course. And so as an entrepreneur, you take that choice with your life, but other people that don't take that choice, I think that's also perfectly valid. And hopefully your listeners aren't feeling in any sense pressured to move lanes if they're happy in the lane they're in.
From your story, I understand that traveling to Singapore and China has been a pivotal part of your life. Could you walk me and your audience to what made you make this decision and what happened over there?
Yeah, so again, I was actually working for people after my university. I didn't think I could be a full-time entrepreneur. I didn't know people that were entrepreneurs, really. So I'd had this sort of flush of excitement of building a little bit of a project to making money to go to Australia. But when I had worked for people for about 3 years, my opportunity was to go to Asia and to America to run the marketing for an internet, or actually a digital music technology company, which is fantastic. And I was building a brand for this company, and I'd done that piece of work. And I said to my boss, when am I going to get the next challenge? When are we going to get a promotion? He said, well, when I retire, or when he retired, he was quite happy where he was. And so I said, so I either have to keep doing this for the next 5 to 10 years, or I have to leave. And he said, that's about it. And at the time, this is 1995, the UK was going through some quite tough times. And I went to Singapore and to Hong Kong and to Tokyo and to Taipei. And Asia at the time was really booming, but it was also going through a digital transformation, especially in broadcast technology and music. I tried to find agencies in Asia that could do what I needed to be done, which is PR and marketing in the music business, and there wasn't anybody. So as always, there's always a push and a pull, Nicola, isn't there, right? And you're either pushed enough or you're pulled enough. And I had my boss saying, this is it. And I had Asia going, well, this is here, this is for you. So I sold the house, gave up the job, gave back the car, broke up with my girlfriend. And at the age of like 27, I took my suitcases to Singapore and started the company, East West Public Relations, which is still going today. And it's transferred to a new team of younger the young generation, the next generation of young entrepreneurs to build it. So that was an amazing experience. Just had pre-internet, of course. In 95, Yahoo was just launching. But as a journey, as a young man, it was a great opportunity to go somewhere new, didn't know anybody, didn't know how to run a company, and just create lots of challenges for myself.
This is a clear example of how the good things turn out right after you sacrifice most of the things that you already have. You sacrifice the comfort around you, and you just take a leap of faith. And a lot of work once you get to the point where you get to scale the business, but obviously the starting points are sacrifice and a leap of faith.
Yeah, and I guess I kind of took the off ramp. I was in one lane. I kind of went, oh, I'll take the off ramp and go somewhere entirely different. And again, as a life journey for your listeners, the off ramp can create amazing opportunities. You're going to definitely lose some things, but you're going to gain some things. And in my experience, we don't know what we're going to gain, but we do know what we're going to lose. And so that's the hard part of taking the off ramp.
And this again relates to this example you keep on giving with the pull and push effect. Obviously, once you give away something else will replace its place. Tell me, so I've been into marketing for 4 or 5 years right now, and I had the pleasure to work with people all over the world. That's why I keep on looking for guests who are not local, but all over the world as well. What are some of the main lessons you've learned from working in different cultures, in different environments?
Okay, so just to give a bit of context, so I've
Okay.
been an international marketing manager for a Siemens company. So I was responsible for marketing worldwide. So I spent time in America, spent time in Asia, and then I started businesses in Singapore, China, and India. And I've started multiple kinds of businesses in those different countries. Sort of a little bit of a context. So I think cultural differences, one would be that in Asia, people are driven by shame, and in Western, Christian cultures, we're driven by guilt. So there's a fundamental difference in the cultural drivers. So Asia is either, Buddhist based, and there are some Christians, but for example, in China, there's not. So culturally, we have in Asia the Buddhist, or this, about self-actualization and about feeling that there isn't going to be a judgment day. There's going to be you on a journey in your life. So that in a way is very liberating. Same obviously in India in different ways. But in Asia, and especially in China, and Chinese cultures, a lot is based on face. So it's about how you're seen. Because if there's not an ultimate judgment day, there's a kind of judgment day every day by your peers and your society. So in Asia, especially in China, there's a lot of importance placed on how you're seen. And you see this with Japanese around, for example, bowing and how low people bow to each other. That's a sign of respect. Whereas in Western cultures, we shake hands. In Asian cultures, or especially Japan, there's a bowing. In China, there's a who gets to come into the room first, who gets to sit first, who gets to sit where. And in Confucian cultures, with predominantly the Chinese-based cultures, we have the whole concept of Confucian or Confucius, which is around the eldest male will be the authority, regardless of. So as a Western male in Asia, for example, if you're the eldest, and ironically enough, if you're bald, they think that somehow means that you must be learned. Partly comes from, of course, the monks not having hair, right? So culturally, you can end up in a situation where just by dint of being older and being a foreigner, and in my case, being bald, you have a certain authority, which you may or may not deserve. So managing teams across cultures, for example, then what you'll find is that China isn't all China, in the same way that in America, people on the East Coast and the West Coast think differently, and people in the Midwest think differently. People in mainland China, the Shanghainese, have a view of the Beijing people that the Beijing people are farmers. The Beijing people think that the Shanghainese are all tricksters and merchants.
Mhm.
The Vietnamese view the Cambodians in a certain way because they spent many, many, many years at war with each other hundreds of years ago. And the Singaporeans are really Malay and Indonesian and Thai. So each culture has its own set of preconceptions and prejudices.
Yeah.
So when it comes to managing those, really, Nicolai, one has to be kind of sensitive. So the best thing you can really do if you're looking at managing in those situations is to be as learned as you can, to educate yourself as much as you can, and really not make any assumptions that what you know about Western culture, Western management, and Western priorities will transfer to the Asian environment, for example, just in the same way that if you went to America or Latin America or Africa, you'd have to be sensitive to those cultural changes. So it may be a rather long-winded answer. I hope that kind of maybe gives a bit of context and maybe a little bit of guidance.
Yeah, very, very good context and a very detailed picture on this. Thank you for breaking it down and making the comparisons between the different cultures. And one of the reasons I actually asked this question is obviously different cultures, even though they might seem close to one to the other, they have a lot of differences. But at the same time, I still manage to see some similarities between cultures that are, for example, very distant one from the other. You just mentioned that this tradition to respect other people, and especially if they are both right, this is here in Bulgaria. We have a very similar tradition. Well, it's beginning to be, to be something from the distant past, but 2-3 generations before me, we were taught to always respect the other people, no matter the situation, no matter the environment. Most of the time, they are more right than you. Now, as you grow up, you understand that respect is not just the given on the basis of age. Obviously, you want to see their mindsets, their experiences. But the point is, we still see some similarities, even though the cultures are distant. One of the follow-up questions now, you have a lot of experience there and have a lot of success of growing this PR agency in this business. And you mentioned that started in the late 90s, which it survived through a lot of technical revolutions, technical innovations, and just shifts throughout the globe. From all of the different achievements that you've managed to achieve, right? What would be one of the proudest for you?
Well, I think that East-West public relations is still in existence, after what will be 30 years in a couple of years' time. That we survived everything from currency crisis, SARS, COVID. We've had so many ups and downs. So I think that the brand and the concept that I had back in the early 90s
Mhm.
is still valid. And I think, that would probably be my proudest professional achievement, I suppose. And on a personal level, what I'm proudest of is that I've managed to be self-sustaining for 30 years across multiple geographies. I started from suitcases in Singapore and China and India. I didn't live there, but I just started a business there, and now back in the UK. So, and I've managed in the last 16 years to have two amazing children, two daughters, and then I've managed to take them to school every day, that I am with them every evening, and that I've been able to give them the best education that there is and have as much time as I would like to give them. So personally, that equation of time and money and interest, I've somehow managed, not always perfectly and not without some anxiety and frustration, but that I've managed to keep businesses going and lead the kind of lifestyle that I want and take care of the people that are important to me. That if I'm allowed, that's maybe, so is that, I'm sorry, Nicola, I butchered your question, haven't I? If there's one thing I'm proud of, it's, I suppose, that there's a formula I've tried to live to, and I've somehow managed to make the numbers work.
It's totally normal once we start talking about proudest moments to include the family and to include the fact that you are able to provide and to take care of the ones you love. So my admiration for the gym is no worries that you've mentioned it.
Thank
And
you.
I wanted to to transition to the fact that your book is out and it has been a helpful guide for its readers. Would you tell me what triggered you to write it and what kind of stories we can see there?
Yeah. So let me get a copy here. So this is the, upside down. This is the book, The Unnoticed Entrepreneur, Step into the Spotlight. So it's actually published by Wiley, the international publishers from New York. And what I found, Nikolai, was that on my podcast, The Unnoticed Entrepreneur, I have entrepreneurs come and explain how they get noticed so that other entrepreneurs can learn from fellow entrepreneurs as opposed to from consultants and salespeople. Some people like the podcast format. And what I wanted to do was to then make that available to people that preferred reading and to make it a bit more substantial. So that was what I decided to do. I started to use AI actually to translate and take transcripts, and then to use some other technologies in a VA in the Philippines to collate the books. So actually, I published 2 books, one after the other. Each are 50 essays from my conversations with entrepreneurs. And then it was a finalist in the British Business Book Awards 2 years ago. And then Wiley reached out and said, they'd like to publish the series. So it was, again, sort of a wonderful story of starting something, believing in it, and then getting success later rather than knowing where it would end. But I just felt it was the right thing to do. And it's available on Amazon and also in some bookstores, including, I went to Singapore and met some friends and they had my book. And I said, how did you get that? And they said, we bought it at the local bookshop, Kinokuniya. So,
Wow.
That was pretty amazing.
This is also, if I were in your shoes, this is also one of the moments that would put on the proudest moments list.
Yeah, exactly, Nicola. It was, I stood in the store and went, that's my book, that's my book. Yeah, and I met the people that were in the bookstore, and it sold quite well. So that was wonderful. So it's available, The Unnoticed Entrepreneur by me, Jim James, in online stores like Amazon, but also in bookstores.
Great. And just one of the main things that I get from this conversation is every time you take a risk and you put your heart and your values, most importantly, your values into what you're doing, you might not get the gifts and the prizes immediately, but once this moment comes, it's a very sweet moment. You almost feel like a child. I still see you shining and being happy about talking about your stories and what you've been through. So this flame is still in you for sure.
Thank you. I'm now 56, and if I've got childish qualities, that's fantastic that they've managed to survive. But I think that idea that what keeps us young is doing things that we love, right? And being with the people that we love and care for, and taking risks. Some of them don't work out, and so you do have some scars as well. So I think that what we have to try and think about is which balance, how much. But for me, that whole comment I made earlier about we accomplish in proportion to what we attempt, Nicola, this idea that I'm only going to learn by taking myself out of my comfort zone and by changing lanes, if you like. You have to learn how to drive faster. And I do believe that's what keeps us excited with life, and it keeps us with an energy, because life has amazing energy in it if you reach out and let it flow through you.
I agree. You just need to let it touch you and let it connect with you. One last question that I want to close this episode with. We usually have favorite stories, fiction or non-fiction, that we always come back to for inspiration. Do you have a specific story?
You know, I do, and it's actually going to be around my grandfather on my mother's side. And, you know, my grandfather was in the war, and only when he passed away did we find out, you know, some of the medals that he had been keeping in the bottom drawer. You know, Bill Hemmings, his name was. And my grandfather lived in a village in Sussex, and he was quite a patrician looking gentleman, quite, you know, tall, full head of silver wavy hair and a moustache. And, you know, we would walk around the village, and he didn't have to, but if there was a piece of litter on the floor, he would pick it up. And I remember saying, you know, to him, and I must have been, you know, 7 or 8 years old. I said, "Grandpa, that's not our litter. Why are you picking it up?" And he said, "Because it shouldn't be here. You know, and we should always try and leave a place better than we found it." And I even to this day, I can remember it very clearly and thinking, here's a man of great stature, a great success, and great bravery. And he's still thinking about the little moments, the little ways that he can help and make a difference. And I suppose that's been one of my abiding thoughts. It's not an entrepreneurial story. It's a story of someone doing good with a genuine heart. And I think that at the end of the day might be my story that guides me, because money comes and goes. Money is not an indicator of happiness or even of being a good person. But I think leaving a place better than you found it by taking small and caring actions, for me, would be the story that I would live with and that I do live with every day.
I love it. I love it, and I still see some relevance to being an entrepreneur, because if you're doing something, you're usually trying to solve a problem that a niche has, and you do it with small daily steps. So I love the fact that this is one of the stories engraved in your mindset. Any closing thoughts that you want to share with the audience and you want to, mention?
Well, Nicola, I'd love it if anyone's interested in touching base with me. They can come to my website, jimajames.com. I have the Unnoticed Entrepreneur podcast and books, and I also have some courses there for anybody that wants to work on getting noticed and have a Facebook group. All of these are explained at jimajames.com. So if anyone's interested to reach out to me, Nicola, I'd invite them to come and connect with me via the website. So thank you so much for entertaining me and my musings today.
Thank you for sharing this time with me. I will leave the links in the description to be better for the audience. And I hope we speak again soon.
I look forward to it. Thank you very much for inviting me on your show.
Of course. See you.